Hello and welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wade. This is the podcast where we explore population health issues impacting your community. Dissect and Connect is a service of New River Valley Community Services and the Montgomery County Prevention Partners. Minister Michelle Mathis is co-founder and executive director of the Olive Branch Ministry, a faith-based harm reduction agency serving 9 counties in the North Carolina Foothills, Piedmont region. She is the director of a tri-county overdose response team and Points of Hope, a justice-centered education and syringe access program. Michelle is also board president and interim executive director of the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition and serves in the National Faith and Harm Reduction movement. She believes that honoring an individual's journey with compassion and love is the key to a successful connection. While her faith is the motivation behind her work, extending hope and extending life is her mission. Michelle, welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about what the next little bit holds. Thank you.
Well, it's great to see you again. I was lucky enough to hear you speak a couple of times last year and just knew that I had to get you on our show, so I'm glad that you've agreed to take time to chat with me today. So, for folks who aren't familiar with you, can you talk a little bit about the work of the Olive Branch Ministry and its purpose?
Sure. Olive Branch Ministry is a faith-based harm reduction organization that my spouse and I started back around 2009, and we became a nonprofit several years later. We do faith-based harm reduction. That means that our faith is our motivator for what we do, but it is not the what of what we do. Meaning, we don't evangelize, we don't try to convert people, we don't discuss theology. We simply love folks without judgment, meet them where they are, because someone once met us where we were. We serve in the Foothills, Piedmont area of North Carolina. So if you're thinking from Virginia to South Carolina down 321, we literally touch both borders and cover 9 counties in that area with things like overdose response team, education for justice involved folks, so folks in jail. We do syringe access programs. We're working on anti-stigma campaigns, and just recently have started not only Hep C testing, but Hep C treatment, low barrier treatment, which means you don't have to quit using drugs in order to receive the treatment. And then we also are now partnering with another organization to provide low barrier Suboxone for people who are interested in taking that next positive step, but aren't ready for complete abstinence-based recovery.
You do a lot.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. I started doing this full time in 2018 when we finally got funding. We used to joke and say our 8 to 5s paid for our 5 to 8s, right? But we were fortunate enough to be given a contract to start an overdose response team in one of the counties that we're in. And that allowed me to quit my regular job and actually make my passion my career.
So you may have touched upon this briefly a few moments ago, but why is this your passion?
I started doing social justice work back in the early 90s, starting with working with victims and survivors of sexual assault. And over the years, I moved from there to doing HIV outreach and education. And I did that actually for a number of years, did some other social justice work. But it was through my HIV work that I was introduced to the formal concept of what harm reduction is. And as a minister serving in a church at that time, the church had an abstinence-based housing program for folks newly in recovery and people coming out of incarceration. And it's a wonderful program, and I love the program and the work that they do. But what I realized as I sat Sunday after Sunday with my robe on was that the people that I was called to serve would not feel welcome there. Mm-hmm. And it had nothing to do with the church itself. It had to do with the fact that every message had to do with abstinence-based recovery. But I knew that there were so many people who weren't at that point, who might never get to that point, but still deserve to hear and feel the love of God, and interact and build relationships with people who wouldn't judge them and who would encourage them in that, to take that next positive step. So I traded in my collar and my robe for my Converse and my baseball hat, and left. For me, it was very important not to get all preachery, but it tells us in the book of Numbers, I believe, there was a calling of all the religious leaders to the tabernacle tent and to worship. But there were two brothers who were also leaders, priests, who left because they knew that the worship also needed to take place with the people who lived in the tents. And so for me, there's some folks that are called to the tabernacle and some that are called to the tent. And I'm a tent kind of gal.
I like it. Well, you take on an approach that may not seem orthodox, for lack of a better term, when you talk about harm reduction and taking a faith-based approach, when so many people still to this day see addiction, substance use disorders as more of a moral failing. True?
That's true. That is very true, and that is something that we battle on a daily basis. The stigma around this being a moral issue instead of a chemical change in someone's brain. For that, I take the approach of, I don't want to be a stone thrower. That's not, all of us have sinned, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be a stone thrower. I want to be a stooper. I want to be one who reaches down, who gets down on other folks' level and figure out how do we build you up? And, that's a big controversy sometimes. We often get accused of enabling people because we have a syringe access program, right? Or we hand out Narcan, which is the medication that reverses opiate overdose for those who don't know. And I say I am an enabler, and I'm proud to be an enabler. But I enable people to have a second chance at life. I enable people to breathe again. I enable people to build a trusting relationship with someone who's not going to judge them, who's going to be there consistently every time to say, hey, how are you? How's your mom and them? What'd you have for dinner last night? Did you have dinner last night? If not, how do we help you have dinner tonight? And enable people to begin to find hope again. It's not the work. It's not me. It's the work that is that process. But we have to have people who are willing to have that and to do that role. And that's where my calling lies.
Well, your region that you serve, your part of the world, is pretty rural.
It is.
So what kind of outreach strategies do you use to connect and engage with folks?
When we first got started years ago, and I should say that syringe access has been legal in North Carolina since 2016. We may or may not have been involved with it beforehand. And we may or may not have taken bags of corn chips and boxes of granola bars and opened them up and put clean syringes in them and delivered them to people. Because who's going to stop a minister delivering food? Just saying.
Right.
Hypothetically. So we had to be creative from the beginning on how were we going to do this work. I like to call it holy trouble. And that truly is what it is at times. But we are just regular people. I don't go by reverend. I don't go by pastor. I go by minister in my bio, but I just go by Michelle. And I think taking that approach and just saying, what's going on? Tell me what your goals are. And then let's talk about how do we reach those together. It being rural, we can't do things like have a big van like they have in Austin, Texas, which is beautiful, which is all graffitied up and talks all about, syringe access and naloxone and all that kind of thing. Our ministry vehicles are grandma cars that are gray that everybody has. So when we pull up in somebody's driveway or you meet somebody in a fast food restaurant parking lot, we don't stick out. We have to be really careful about that because everybody knows everybody in our communities.
Right.
We also have to realize that we need to meet the community where they are. So not every community wants us to come in, blazing with balls of fire and saying, we're going to demand that we do syringe access here, because that doesn't work and you build more enemies than friends. So just like we say with congregations, with communities as well, we test the waters. We see where folks are politically, socially, culturally, and then we modify our approach to fit that community.
So it's really a grassroots approach.
It is, very much.
What kind of engagement or relationships do you have with elected officials in the different communities that you serve? Or do you have a relationship?
In some areas, great. Gaston County, for example, where we started the overdose response team. Several, city council people, county commissioners, I can call up at any point in time. The county manager, the mayor, not a problem. The public health director, DHHS director, leaders in the hospital, communities, not a problem. They know who Olive Branch is. They know the work that we do. The majority of them support it, and it's great. In my own hometown, I'm told that for many years, we don't have an opioid problem. We don't have a drug problem. If we get rid of the homeless people, then we're not going to have any of those problems. And it varies. Sometimes we have a lot of support from law enforcement, from elected officials. In some areas, they want to pretend that we don't exist, or they will support us behind closed doors, but because they're an elected person, they realize that their constituency will not support some of the things that we do. So in public, we don't have their support.
They don't want to be seen as soft on crime.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the work of the overdose response team that you're responsible for.
The overdose response team has been around for a little over 2 years in Gaston County. This year, we expanded it to Lincoln County and Cleveland County, which are neighboring counties. But in Gaston County, myself and we have 2 other individuals on the team, we are on call 24/7. And if we receive a call to the hospital that someone has been brought in with an overdose, then we will go to the hospital if the patient wants us to meet with them, do a short interview, and then follow up with them 24 to 48 hours later, depending on their medical needs. We follow that individual with peer support for a period of 3 months, sometimes as long as 6 months if the individual requests it. And that peer support looks like calling just to say, hey, how are you doing? Making linkage to care. So if they need harm reduction services, we do that. If they want to go to detox or go to rehab or simply find a 12-step traditional or non-traditional, then we connect them with that. If they need food, if they need housing, if they need clothing, we don't provide those things, but we link them with individuals who possibly can. And so, some people call it bridge to care, linkage to care. That's what we do. We have I think right now it's an 84% success rate with linking people to care in Gaston County. It's too new to tell with Lincoln and Cleveland counties, but especially with COVID going on. But we also get referrals from EMS. So if they reverse someone in the field and they give them naloxone and that individual doesn't want to go to the hospital, refuses transport, they're given an opportunity to be linked with us. And we do that same kind of follow-up. We have employers that contact us, family members that contact us and say, so-and-so overdosed, or so-and-so is at high risk of overdose, or I'm worried about this employee that they're going to overdose at work. Can you help us? And so we provide that kind of peer support to those individuals. If someone is incarcerated, that is either on our caseload or comes to our attention through law enforcement, we have a pen pal program. So we will make video, jail visits as needed, or we will write those that person and give them support. Whatever, their goals are, whatever they express to us that they want or desire as far as a relationship. If we engage with them and they say, you know what, I don't want to hear from y'all, then we stop. But many times when that happens, 3 months, 4 months down the road, they call us, say, hey, I'm ready now.
That sounds like a great program. An 84% success rate. Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
That's incredible.
That doesn't mean 84% abstinence-based recovery rate.
Right. Right.
So just to clarify, but
Yes.
that is linking them to another community resource.
Yeah, but still, I mean, that's huge. Just keeping them connected.
It's been amazing, and you have to have the right staff with the right approach. Both of the folks that work with me are from the communities in which we serve, and they are amazing. They are well known on both sides of substance use disorder, both from being very much in the throes of use, and then also having abstinence-based lifestyles. And so they know how to communicate, they understand, they have empathy, not just sympathy. That is key.
That's a great point. Well, that's one area that I think a lot of people can get behind, but the syringe access program, that's a whole different animal. I would imagine that there's been plenty of pushback around that.
Strangely enough, in my own hometown, there has not been.
Really?
But yes, there wasn't, because we're fortunate in North Carolina that we don't have to ask anybody's permission
to
have
is
a
that.
syringe access program. So it's a little bit different than it is in Virginia and some other states. In North Carolina, all you have to do is notify the state that you're going to start a syringe access program. You have to let them know, what your sustainability plan is, what your safety plan is, like where do you store your supplies, how you interact with law enforcement, how you dispose of your supplies, how you track your information. And then we're required to notify local law enforcement that this is what we're going to do, give them a copy of the plan. And then once a year, we file a report with the state on what our activities are. So it's much different in North Carolina, and we are very blessed to have that leniency.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been resistance in some communities from getting public support for it. But many law enforcement agencies are now doing law enforcement assisted diversion in North Carolina. And so we work hand in hand with that through the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition, which basically says if someone's picked up on a low level drug offense or an offense that's related to drug use, perhaps they were breaking and entering in order to steal something to sell, to buy drugs, right?
Yeah.
There's a chance that the DA could decide to defer those charges to allow this person to engage with harm reduction in hope for, a treatment and recovery outcome. So that happens in a lot of the areas that we're in. But in some of the areas, mainly the resistance that we get is not from the public at large, but it is from the faith community. That's why I work very closely with the North Carolina Council of Churches and the National Faith and Harm Reduction to work with faith leaders to help explain why syringe access is important. That is very often the person's first chance and first positive step in what may be a long road on the recovery continuum. We know that the Center for Disease Control says that people who participate in syringe access programs are 5 times more likely to enter into a recovery, abstinence-based recovery. So we know that it works. It's evidence-based programming.
Yeah, the data is definitely there to support it.
It
doesn't make things worse.
No, it does not. It prevents disease, the spread of HIV, the spread of Hep C, which is rampant in our area.
Off the charts.
The majority of the folks that we test are Hep C positive. And so being able to cut down on that. And when people begin to see an improvement in health, less abscesses, their Hep C is cured, then a lot of times they're willing to begin thinking about making other health changes. And that includes a reduction in use.
Yeah. A ray of hope.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Our tagline is extending hope, extending life.
Which I love, by the way. So you, I'm sure, have seen the reports across the country about the increase in overdoses and related fatalities over the last few months. A lot of that's being attributed to the pandemic. What are you seeing in the communities you serve?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen a huge spike.
Really?
I believe it is driven by a couple of things. I believe, one, the isolation,
Mm-hmm.
and unemployment. So people aren't socializing like they were at work. They've lost, if they had a support system there, they don't have that. For a long time, a lot of us were on kind of lockdown in our homes and we weren't supposed to leave. So that isolation plays into brain health issues, depression, anxiety levels. So usage increases around those issues. But then I also know that with unemployment here in North Carolina, we were given a $600 a week increase in above and beyond what your normal unemployment would be. So for many people, not only did they have that increase, but that could have been 2 or 3 times more than what they were used to bringing home on a weekly basis. So access to that and the stimulus check created a whole different type of economy that was available to folks that had not been available before. We also know that there has been a big influx in the last 3 to 4 months of certain pressed pills and certain drugs in our area that are containing fentanyl that we had not seen prior to. And so we're knowing that there are people that are, taking these drugs, they may be snorting them, injecting them, whatever, driving their car to the gas station and literally passing out at the pump. And we're not talking one person on occasion. In one of our towns, we've had like 5 or 6 people do it in a single day, literally pass out at the gas pump. And it's all from, this 1 or 2 particular drugs.
Which underscores the importance of harm reduction.
Yes. And not just the passing out of safe supplies of fentanyl test strips, of making sure that people have naloxone, but also the education piece.
Yep.
Educating the public, but educating the folks that we serve as well. Helping with things like budgeting. If you get a windfall, what do you do with it? Making sure that you're not using a loan, making sure that you're testing what you have, things of that nature. It's not just let's hand somebody safe equipment and leave. That relationship really plays into this.
So I'm curious, what's the best part of your gig? What do you enjoy the most?
When I get a phone call that says, or a text message, which is a lot of times what it is, thank you, your naloxone saved my life last night.
It's hard to beat that.
That's amazing. Or when I got a report from a staff member that said, I encountered somebody the other day in the grocery store and we struck up a conversation and I told them I worked for Olive Branch. And they said, oh, that lady with the gray hair, she met me in the emergency room the night I overdosed and I've been sober for 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Not my word. I don't use that term, but they use that term.
Yeah.
Those kind of things are wonderful. And I really thought in taking this on full time that's what I would get to do and still be in the street a lot. But what I found was there's a lot of administrative work. And that's the downside, is that I don't get nearly as much hands-on outreach as I would like to have these days. Yeah. But I still do, just not as much as I'd like.
Well, that's definitely got to be the wind behind your sail. It
is. And I tell people it's not us, it's the work. And, we're blessed and we're fortunate to be able to do this work. I hope that we're able to do this for a long time. Yeah. I'd love to work myself out of a job, but reality tells me that's not possible. It's really not. And so what I do is make the best of it, and we try to reach as many people as consistently as we can with as much as we can, and we will do that for as long as we can.
Well, it's disheartening, but you and I agree that this problem is not going away anytime soon. What, as you think about the future, both short and long term. What are you most afraid of? What worries you most about individuals who live with substance use disorders?
My concern right now for the immediate is the lack of funding for brain health issues like substance use disorder. We don't have enough funding to do research. We don't have enough funding for treatment. We don't have enough funding to help support those who have no income. So there's a poster in my office that says, all you need is love and funding. And, we need it on a national and an international level. The other thing is I think that we have done a great disservice to communities of color and to the Black community in that we have focused so hard and so fast on the opioid issue when we know that heroin has been an issue for a year in those, for years in those communities.
Right.
And we didn't respond appropriately during the 80s to the crack epidemic, but now we are very focused on opioids, and so we have a lot of apologizing to do and a lot of work that we have to do very humbly to be able to make inroads in those communities now to address the opioid issue, which is very alive and well in the Black community and in communities of color. And then I think looking far out, we know that the next crisis is on its way. I believe that's probably going to be benzos. And, we don't have naloxone for benzos. So what do we do with that? We're already seeing with people who are using crystal meth that have fentanyl in it, they're having what we call sleepy meth episodes, where they get the quick buzz from the crystal meth and then fentanyl hits and then they're out and they're overdosing. So what do we do with that? And then the new chemicals that are coming out that we're seeing, people think they're taking an opioid and they're having heart attacks at 21, 22, 23 years old, and they're dying from these heart attacks or cardiac events because there's chemicals out there that we're not yet able to really track. And my brain's not smart enough to run a spectrometer, even if I had one, to know what I was looking at. But that's my concern is yes, we need to be focused on the issue at hand, but we have to look back and we also have to look forward. We can't just afford to focus on what the here and now.
It's not so much the substance, it's the disease, it's the systems of support or lack thereof that
Yes.
really deserve our attention and our energy and our dollars.
Yes. And community support and, working with churches and communities of faith to say, hey, we can serve folks without requiring a theological conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It does a disservice to the community to say, you have to listen to this sermon before I give you soup, or come to this Bible study and you can access our church closet, our clothes closet. Jesus always addressed the physical first, and then the theological conversation came. The spiritual work came later. And we have to be willing to do that because in the South, especially, the church is the epicenter of education. Public schools are public schools, but we know that from a very young age, people are educated in the church. So we have a powerful moment, if we don't pass it by, to change the way that the church looks at substance use disorder, and really begin to see healing within our congregations and our communities, if we're willing to be honest and have some open conversations.
Do you feel like it's gotten better?
In some areas, but there's a lot of work still to be done.
Sure.
Yeah.
Michelle, do you have any resources, any websites or books that you might recommend to our listeners?
Absolutely. I would say check out our website, olivebranchministry.org, or pointsofhopeinc.org. That's our anti-stigma campaign that we're running. On our main website, you can learn more a little bit about what we do, but there's also resources on there about what is fentanyl, what are fentanyl test strips, what is naloxone, how do you administer it, where do you go to get it, and then we also have resources in Spanish. as well for some of those same things. So I think that would be a good resource. The pointsofhopenc.org is a good resource to learn about how stigma can be a barrier to care and about how words really matter. At our agency, we do not use the term addict. In fact, it is banned from our agency because we work with Marys and Toms and Alfonsos and Vickies all day long. We do not work with addicts. And, there's other terms that we've been taught to use, clean versus dirty, relapse versus reinitiation of use. Those words matter. And sometimes that initial conversation that you have someone is your make it or break it with that person. So changing our vocabulary is a good way to open up our minds, and then also show folks that we're open to working with them in a non-stigmatizing and non-judgmental way. So I think that's important. There's a lot of books that are out there. Beth Macy's written a book. One of my favorite books actually is written by Ryan Hampton, and it's called The American Fix. And it is about the recovery industry and about how a lot of times what we think with abstinence-based recovery programs are going to be wonderful, about how that doesn't work for everybody. So I think that's a really great book.
Great. Well, I appreciate the recommendation, and we'll include the links to all of those in our show notes today. And awesome. The dogs are barking, so I think that means we're almost out of time.
Sorry about that.
No worries. You've been incredibly generous with your time. I'm so appreciative, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you again.
Great to see you again.
Yeah. Before I let you go, how about some parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
We're all called to do some sort of work. Whether we are a bystander observing so we can go and tell other people, or we are called to do some heavy lifting, whether it's social justice work or policy or educating voters on issues. Some of us are called to get down and dirty with the nitty gritty and have direct work, hands-on work with directly impacted people. None of us have a more important job or a less important job than the other. Know what your calling is and walk in your calling, but be willing to know that your calling can change. And just be open to that. Be open to being educated through life experience and through those who've walked this journey before. Above all, love folks, extend hope to them. And through doing that, we extend quality of life for everyone.
What a wonderful way to wrap up our conversation. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And all the work that you're doing to help people who are struggling. I hope we'll have an opportunity to maybe talk again at some point in the future and get you back on the show.
I would love it. Anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Care and stay safe.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dissect and Connect is sponsored by Teen Connections, a leadership program through Planned Parenthood South Atlantic that empowers youth with the facts about sexual health and the skills to build stronger, healthier relationships. It's free, totally virtual, and you can earn $100 when you graduate as a Teen Connections peer educator in your community. Join a Teen Connections program from home today. For more information, be sure to check out the show notes from today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dissect and Connect podcast. To learn more about Montgomery County Prevention Partners or New River Valley Community Services, be sure to check us out on Facebook or visit nrvcs.org/podcast.